Ah, my lovely companions of the night, gather closer, for I bring words to stir the shadows that lie dormant within each of you. You have walked through the silent corridors of your existence, where whispers and shadows dance in the corners of your mind. The world around you thrives on noise, on the endless chatter that makes the world feel alive. But in your silence, in the void of your words, you have found the truest power. You have let your silence grow into something far more potent than any words could ever hope to be. It is in that silence, that vast emptiness, where the game begins to change. The silent ones are the ones who control the game, the ones who watch, the ones who wait, and when the time comes, the ones who will make their move. The time for action has arrived. Your silence has been your weapon, and in your stillness, you have turned the games of the world against those who once thought they held the power. In the early days of your journey, they laughed. They ridiculed you for not joining the noise, for not participating in their endless charades. They believed you weak, insignificant, and alone. They assumed that silence was weakness, that it was submission to the noise they thrived on. They couldn't comprehend that your silence was never a surrender. No, it was a calculation. While they shouted, you watched. While they spoke without thinking, you measured every word they spoke, every step they took. You learned from their arrogance, their assumptions, and their self-proclaimed superiority. You gathered their lies, their missteps, their weaknesses, and you kept them in the shadows of your mind. They thought you invisible, unnoticed. But in truth, they never realized they were the ones who were blind to the power of silence. They never saw how the quiet ones could dismantle everything they had built. Your silence, my companions, was never an absence. It was always a presence, a looming force that hovered just beneath the surface, ready to strike. They thought their loud voices, their dominance in the world of noise, would drown you. But it was in that very noise that they made their greatest mistakes. They underestimated you, for they never understood the depth of your silence. They never realized that it was in your silence that you forged your strength, in the quiet moments where you observed, where you learned, where you understood their weaknesses. They were too busy talking, too absorbed in their own world of noise, to ever consider what the silent ones might be planning. The game was never about being heard, never about being the loudest or the most boisterous. No, the game was about knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. And you, my companions, have mastered the art of waiting, of listening, of observing. While they wore themselves thin with their incessant chatter, you bided your time, knowing that every word they uttered, every action they took, would become their undoing. In their arrogance, they thought they were in control, that their voices commanded the world. But what they failed to realize was that every word, every boast, every overconfident declaration was feeding your strategy. They gave you everything you needed, and all you had to do was wait. And in the waiting, the power shifted. Their games, once stacked in their favor, began to crumble under their own weight. You never needed to say a word. Their own actions betrayed them. And now, as the world continues to spin on its axis of noise, as they continue to play their games with reckless abandon, you stand poised at the edge of victory. Your silence has become your weapon, your strength, your shield. While they make their moves in the open, you remain in the shadows, unseen and underestimated. But this is where the true power lies. They think they control the board, but in reality, they are the ones who have been playing into your hands. Every move they make is another step closer to their downfall. Every boast, every careless word, every move made in arrogance only serves to tighten the noose around their necks. They have played their game, but they did not realize that they were never the true players. Now, It is your turn. The moment of reckoning has arrived. You, the silent ones, have become the masters of the game. The world that once ignored you, the voices that once drowned you out, are now the ones who will fall before you. They will realize far too late that their loud words and their grand gestures were nothing more than smoke and mirrors. Your silence was the blade that cut through their illusions, and now they are left exposed. There is nothing left for them to hide behind. The game they thought they were winning has already been lost. Their own arrogance has led them to the edge, and now it is you who will decide their fate. The beauty of your silence, my companions, is that it doesn't need to announce itself. It does not need to shout from the rooftops. No, it is in the quiet, in the unseen moments, that it becomes all the more powerful. They have been playing their game in the light, thinking their dominance was absolute. But in the darkness, in the places they never thought to look, you have been growing stronger. You have been gathering the pieces of the puzzle, aligning them in such a way that when the time comes, they will have no defense. And when that moment arrives, you will strike. Not with a loud declaration, not with a fanfare of words, but with the quiet precision of someone who has waited, someone who has learned, someone who has watched. This is not a game of chance, my companions. This is a game of strategy. This is a game of patience, of knowing when to act and when to remain still. And in the silence, you have honed this skill to perfection. While they scrambled, while they shouted and raged, you remained calm, composed, and observant. You understood that the key to winning was never in the noise, never in the theatrics. It was in the quiet moments, the ones they didn't see, the ones they dismissed as insignificant. But it was in these moments where your power grew, where your influence expanded, and where the seeds of their destruction were planted. And now, as they stand on the precipice of their own undoing, they will finally realize the truth. They will understand that it was not their dominance that brought them here, but their own hubris. It was their own arrogance that led them to believe they could silence you, that they could drown you out. But in their attempts to do so, they have made a fatal mistake. They have forgotten that silence is not absence, it is presence. Your silence has been the quiet storm that has grown louder with each passing day. And now, as the storm breaks, they will be left standing in the ruins of their own creation, their own game turned against them. The silence you have embraced, the quietude you have cultivated, has become the very thing that will undo them. Their world of noise, their world of bluster and empty words, has crumbled beneath the weight of your stillness. And now, you stand at the helm, ready to claim your victory. You have won without speaking a word. You have shattered their illusions without raising a finger. The game has been turned against them, and it is you, the silent one, who will walk away as the true victor. So, stand tall, my companions of the night. Let them see you for what you truly are, not weak, not invisible, but powerful beyond measure. Your silence has spoken louder than anything they ever could have said. Your silence has been your strength, and now it is the weapon that will end their game. Your silence, my companions, has not only been a weapon in this battle, but it has been the very foundation upon which you have built your strength. When others played their games with words and false pretenses, you remained steadfast in your stillness, in your refusal to be part of their chaotic noise. The world around you begged for you to speak, for you to engage, but you understood something they never did. The value of restraint, the power of control. They sought to drown you with their voices, but your silence, like a deep river, ran deeper than they could ever imagine. They thought silence was weakness. They thought it was the absence of power, the lack of action. But they did not realize that in the moments you said nothing, In the times you refused to engage in their distractions, you were in fact gathering all the strength that would eventually destroy them. Silence is not absence. It is the space between action and reaction. It is the pause that allows the mind to contemplate, to reflect, to strategize. While they ran on autopilot, driven by their impulses and egos, you had the time to think, to plan, to observe. And all the while, they remained unaware that the game had already changed in your favor. You were not merely biding your time. You were preparing for a strike so precise, so devastating, that it would leave them gasping for air, struggling to understand what had just occurred. They wanted you to react, to rise to the bait they so carelessly threw at your feet. They wanted you to stumble into their traps, to fall victim to their designs. But you never did. Your silence was a mirror that reflected their own insecurities, their own weaknesses. And in doing so, you not only gained the upper hand, you had already begun the process of unraveling their entire existence. They thought their games were clever. They thought their manipulations were cunning. But in the end, it was their own overconfidence, their belief that they could control everything. That would be their downfall. In silence, there is power. But it is not the kind of power that demands recognition or admiration. It is the kind of power that is felt, that lingers in the air like the calm before the storm. It is the kind of power that can bring kings to their knees without ever raising a hand, without ever speaking a word. They, in their brashness, gave you everything you needed. They spoke too much. They revealed their strategies, their fears, their desires. They showed you exactly where they were vulnerable. They revealed the cracks in their armor, the lies they told themselves, the very foundation of their egos. And in your silence, you held these truths like a secret weapon, ready to be unleashed at the perfect moment. They never saw it coming. And now, as their world begins to unravel, they are faced with the most terrifying realization of all. They have been outplayed. The moves they made in haste, the games they played with arrogance, have led them down a path they cannot escape. They thought they were the ones pulling the strings, that they were the ones setting the pace. But it was you, the silent observer, who has controlled the rhythm all along. Every word they uttered, every action they took, every step they made in their supposed dominance was merely another move in the game that you alone were orchestrating. The moment they became too comfortable, too confident in their own supposed superiority was the moment they sealed their fate. And now, it is too late for them to turn back. They have played their hand, and it is weak. It is flawed. It is their undoing. Look at them now, my companions of the night, as they scramble, as they try desperately to cover their tracks, to reassert control over the game. They will try to speak louder, to drown out the silence that has consumed them, but it is no use. The game is already over. Your silence, your presence, has been the hammer that has crushed their fragile house of cards. They are left with nothing but the hollow echoes of their own voices, the empty words that no longer have any power, no longer hold any weight. They will try to fight. They will try to resist. But resistance is futile when the game has already shifted, when the tables have turned, and the rules are no longer the same. They cannot even begin to understand the depth of your silence, the vastness of the space it has created between them and their so-called victory. They thought they could intimidate you with their noise, with their words, with their influence, but all they did was expose themselves. All they did was show you where they were weak, where they were vulnerable. And now, in the final act, it is you who holds all the cards, all the power. Their games have been reduced to nothing more than a pitiful display of desperation as they scramble to find something to hold on to, anything to regain control. But it is too late. They are trapped in the web they so eagerly wove, and they have no idea how to escape. They will search for the source of their downfall. They will look to point fingers, to place blame on anything and anyone, but they will never find it. They will never realize that their defeat was not caused by an external force, but by their own hubris, by their own refusal to understand the true nature of power. Power is not loud. Power is not in the noise. Power is in the silence, in the stillness, in the ability to observe, to think, to act with precision. You have proven this. You have shown them what true power looks like, and now they will be forced to live with the consequences of their ignorance. As you stand above them, as you watch them fall, there will be no satisfaction in your heart. There will be no gloating, no exulting in your victory. Your silence will remain. It will remain as it has always been, a constant reminder of what they failed to understand. The game is over, not because you defeated them with words or actions, but because you allowed them to defeat themselves. They have exposed their own flaws, their own weaknesses, and now they must face the consequences. They cannot blame you for their fall. They can only blame themselves. And as the dust settles, as their cries fade into the distance, you will remain steadfast, unshaken, silent. You have not won because you sought victory, but because you understood the true nature of the game. You understood that in the silence, in the stillness, lies the most powerful weapon of all. And now, as they fade into irrelevance, you will stand as the last one standing, the one who played the game in silence, who watched, who waited, and who emerged victorious. The world will remember your silence. They will remember it as the moment the game turned against them. Your silence, my companions, has been the end of their game. Your silence has been the end of their game. They believed that their loud voices, their endless chatter, and their insistence on being seen would protect them, would shield them from the consequences of their actions. But in the end, it was the quiet ones, the silent ones, who understood the game at its core. You understood that it wasn't about being heard. It wasn't about winning the superficial battles that others fought in the public eye. It was about knowing when to step back, to remain hidden, to remain invisible. Your silence became the breeding ground for strategy, for reflection, and for ultimate power. As the dust settles, as the echoes of their defeated voices fade into the background, you can feel the weight of their arrogance lifting. They sought dominance through noise, through power displays, thinking that their brashness, their loudness, would secure their place. But loudness is a mask, a temporary distraction, a smokescreen designed to hide the cracks in their foundation. It was never real power. Their power was fragile, built on illusions and misdirection. They thought they were invincible, but all they were doing was constructing their own tombstone, one that would eventually collapse under its own weight. The longer they played their games, the more they dug their own graves. You, on the other hand, watched and listened. Every move they made, every word they said, was a key piece of the puzzle you were carefully assembling in the quiet corners of your mind. And while they were consumed with their own grandiosity, their own need to dominate and control, you silently collected the evidence, the clues, the weaknesses that would eventually dismantle everything they had built. The nature of their game was simple. It was based on chaos, on forcing others into submission through sheer force. They tried to bend others to their will with their words, their actions, and their manipulation. But what they never accounted for was the power of restraint, the power of refusing to engage. You knew that in the silence there was space to breathe, to think, to see the world for what it truly was. While they were drowning in the noise of their own making, you found clarity. And with that clarity, you knew exactly what had to be done. In the silence, you were not empty. You were not passive. You were not invisible. No, you were simply waiting. You were gathering the strength that comes from holding back, from choosing not to participate in their distractions. When they tried to drag you into their games, you stayed still, an immovable force. When they attempted to provoke you, to force a reaction, you refused to engage. And in doing so, you broke their rhythm, their flow. You disrupted their perception of control, leaving them unbalanced, unsure of where they stood. They tried to make you small, to make you insignificant, but in their attempt to silence you, they gave you something far more valuable. They gave you space to think, to act, to become more than they ever expected. While they fought with each other in the public eye, while they clashed and argued, you worked in the shadows, building the empire that would one day rise up and cast them into the darkness. As they scrambled, as they tried to regain their footing, you stood unwavering. You watched them, studied them, understood their every move. And with each mistake they made, with each act of arrogance they committed, you moved closer to your victory. They were blind to the power of silence, blind to the strength of restraint. They never understood that silence doesn't mean weakness, it means control. It means choosing when and where to act. It means never being rushed by the chaos around you, never falling victim to the distractions that pull others away from their true purpose. And now, my companions, as they begin to crumble under the weight of their own self-delusion, you will finally see the fruits of your patience. They will look to each other for answers, to the very people who led them down this path of destruction. But in their desperation, they will realize that they can never escape the trap they've built for themselves. They will search for someone to blame, for a scapegoat, but they will never be able to point the finger at you. You are the one who did not engage. You are the one who stayed silent, watched, and waited. And in that waiting, in that silence, you moved the pieces on the chessboard without them ever realizing the game had already been won. Their defeat, as it unfolds, will not be loud. It will not be dramatic. It will not come with the fanfare of celebration. It will be quiet. It will be subtle, like the closing of a door, like the fading of a song that no one thought to listen to. It will come in the form of their own disintegration, their own realization that they were never as strong as they thought they were. And in that moment, they will know the truth. It was never their noise that secured their victory. It was their silence, your silence, that sealed their fate. You have played this game differently than they ever could have imagined. You never sought to win by overpowering them, by shouting louder than they did. You sought to win by becoming something they could never understand, by becoming the quiet force that shapes the world from behind the curtain. They were too focused on their own grandeur, on their own egos, to realize that the true power in this world lies not in the loudest voice, but in the quietest presence. You became the embodiment of that power. Your silence has been a presence in their lives, a constant reminder of the weakness that lies in their attempts to control everything through force. When the world is too loud, too chaotic, it is easy to be swept away in the current of noise. But you chose not to swim with them. You chose to stand still, to resist the tide, and in doing so, you gave yourself the time to understand the true nature of the world around you. You understood that the game they were playing was a game of distraction. It was a game built on illusions of strength, illusions of power. But you saw through it. You saw the truth behind the facade. And now, that truth has come to light. They will never know the full extent of your power. They will never understand how you did it. They will never understand that it was not through force or cunning that you succeeded, but through restraint, through patience, and through the quiet strength of knowing when to act and when to remain silent. Your silence has been the key to their undoing. It has been the rope that has strangled their ambitions. It has been the shadow that has followed them, silently watching, quietly waiting, until the moment was right. And now, that moment has arrived. The game is over. The pieces have all been moved. The tables have turned. And as they look around, desperately searching for a way to reclaim their lost power, they will find nothing but emptiness. They will find nothing but the void they created, the void that has consumed them. They will never realize that it was their own noise, their own arrogance, their own inability to see the quiet strength in the shadows that led them to this point. They will never understand that in their attempt to silence you, they only created the conditions for their own defeat. The game is over, my companions. The silence has won. You have won, not because you were louder, not because you were more dominant, but because you understood the truth. Power is not about speaking the loudest. It is about knowing when to be silent. And in your silence, you have taken everything they held dear. You have dismantled their empire with a quiet hand, with a patient mind, and with the kind of strength that they could never comprehend. You have shown the world that silence is not the absence of power. It is the presence of true strength. And now, as the game ends, you stand as the last one standing, the silent victor who has outlasted them all. In the end, it is not the loudest voice or the most aggressive hand that shapes the world, but the quiet force that waits, watches, and moves with purpose. Your silence was never a weakness, it was a weapon. While they played their games in noise and arrogance, you carefully orchestrated their downfall from the shadows. Now, as they crumble beneath their own hubris, you stand victorious. Not because you shouted the loudest, but because you understood that true power lies in knowing when to remain silent and when to strike. Their game is over, and it was your silence that ended it all.